This is Mr. Abbey coming at you with some Arctic facts this time. Today we're talking a little bit about another really harsh environment. I'm kind of realizing working on this that we probably should have related it to the desert because we're talking about two very extreme, very hard to survive in environments, both of which too, it's really hard to get water because in the deserts it might be really hot and all the water evaporates. But in the Arctic, so much of that water is frozen, it's really hard to get at that water. And also with the temperature extremes, it's another really tough to live in environment. I got kind of excited and I wanted to guys show you the difference between a watery habitat and a really dry habitat and the kind of adaptations you see. But we're kind of coming back to more of the same today, relating the really cold regions of the Arctic to the really tough heat of the deserts. I know it might not seem very similar to you, but as we get into the brain pop and as we get into more of our thoughts there, I think it's going to make a little more sense to us. First off, I want to kind of point out here on my handy dandy globe that this area right around here, around the North Pole, right around the north, is the area that we call the Arctic. You got stuff that live here like polar bears, seals, your reindeer are all animals that are really well adapted to the Arctic. There's some whales and stuff that live up here too. If you're thinking penguins, you're thinking the Antarctic. They live towards the bottom of the globe, but that's okay. You're going to think of a lot of the same things. They actually say that the Antarctic is really the biggest desert on the planet because it gets so little rain and so much of that water is trapped in the ice that it's just like a desert environment. You've got to have a lot of adaptations for that extreme weather, but also for finding good fresh water. And you've got to find ways to get food in a place where there's not going to be a lot of animals and plants living around. Again, when you're thinking of the deserts, you can think of really big changes to the plants that they need. They need those shallow roots to get as much water as they can. In the desert, they have those thick stems to keep as much of their water as they can keep. In the Arctic, you're going to see a lot of also really strange adaptations in those plants where they have really shallow roots so they can get away from the layer of the earth that stays frozen all the time up there. We call it permafrost, which can really damage their roots. They need to stay really low to the ground because that cold breeze can really damage plants too. You're going to see a lot of plants that are short to the ground and short roots, and they're going to grow really fast over the short summers they have, and not really much at all during the winter. Those seeds are going to try to stay safe under the layer of ice. Some seeds actually need to be frozen for a little while to kind of break open their seed coats a little bit for them to even grow. So they're really well adapted to the cold and the ice to the point where they need it to survive. And that's another important thing that we're going to think about when we start talking about Arctic habitats and how they're changing. The fact that a lot of these animals are so well adapted to this kind of environment, to the cold, to the ice, that they actually need it to survive. It's a tough environment and it's tough for them to get by in it, but they need that particular kind of tough environment for their features or their adaptations to make sense for them to work where they live. Um, some of the adaptations you're going to think of when you're thinking of Arctic animals and plants, or especially Arctic animals, you're going to think of that fur that a lot of the animals have, like polar bears, the cattle they've got there, the reindeer. They're all going to have nice thick coats. A lot of your animals, like whales and the caribou, the reindeer, they're going to migrate. So when the food gets scarce in the winter, they're actually going to travel long distances, sometimes in huge herds, to get to places where there's more food available. And some of them have a really cool thing. It's that thick layer of fat they talk about here in our brain pop called blubber. Now, the way blubber works is it's a nice thick layer between your skin and your internal organs, your heart, your lungs, your stomach. You don't want them to get too cold. So what they have is that thick layer of fat that kind of insulates them or keeps the important stuff in their body away from that cold. And one way you can test this out for yourself is by creating what I call a blubber glove. I've kind of started one for you guys a little bit. I'd love for you guys to try this at home. If you do, send me some pictures so you can check so I can check out what you're doing. So, what I've got here, you can use stuff like slime, you can use hair conditioner. I've got a little bit of shaving cream here in a big plastic bag. You want a big plastic bag, maybe a big bowl filled up with water and some ice in there to make it extra, extra cold. So, I've got my blubber bag. That's the big bag that goes on the outside. And then I've got a little smaller bag that's just going to go up my hand. So, you stick your hand in your smaller bag, and then you stick your hand in the smaller bag into the bigger bag with your blubber or your slime or whatever you have it. So you see that it's going all around my hand in that bag. Now, if you take this blubber glove and you stick it down in that cold water, you're going to find that you can't even, no matter how cold that water is, you're not even going to be able to feel it because this thick layer of blubber is going to protect you from the cold. And that's really how those animals use that thick layer of fat to survive. Now, if you are going to do this experiment, please make sure that you're involving your parents, that they know what you're up to, that you're not using anything that they don't want to use for it, um, that they're watching to make sure you're not making a mess and they can help you out with every step of it. But it really is a fun little experiment to make a blubber glove. If you don't get a chance to make it, I'd love to make it when we get back to school. I've been trying to fit it in, but it seems like a good time as any when we're at home thinking about science to make yourself a blubber glove. Again, when we're talking about those tough environments, it's not just tough for animals and plants, it's tough for people too. You might not think that anybody lives in these really cold areas, but there are lots of native tribes that have lived there for thousands of years. They have lots of cool adaptations themselves. They use the blubber from animals to make oil for lamps. A lot of them eat the blubber because it's nice to build up your own body fat when it gets cold. Um, there are a lot of specific ways that they use to survive too. And when we think of how climate change is changing things on the planet too, we're not just thinking about how it's going to change the environment for those people and those animals, even though, like I said, they need that cold. They need those environments to survive. They need that ice because they've relied on it for thousands of years. All the adaptations that they've made, especially animals can't really change their coats and stuff like that. They need that kind of environment to survive. But it's not just about them being far away and having a tough time as it gets warmer either. Another thing we're going to talk about in our brain pop is how when you take all that ice at the top and the bottom of the globe and it starts to melt, it's kind of like a tub if you keep filling it up with more water. So what's going to happen is as all that ice melts, it's going to fill up the oceans more, which is going to take over the spots where we have land. It's going to overflow the shores, and you're going to find that a lot of our islands, a lot of our places near the coast, like Florida, Georgia, a lot of the places that people and animals all rely on to live, are going to start getting more and more flooded with ocean. That can be a major problem for them up north, and that's going to be just as much a problem with us. When we were talking about oceans, we were talking about how since all the oceans are interconnected, that means all those ecosystems, all the habitats, all the places we live, and the conditions that we live in are connected too. So what happens up in the north is going to affect us down here. That ice helps keep temperatures on Earth kind of normal, and they help keep the oceans at a normal level. So once things start to change, it can pick up really fast and it can change the environments not just for those animals that are really far away in the Arctic and we might not think about so much, but it's going to change things for us down south too. These are really important things to consider when we're listening to our brain pop, when we're getting into our quiz. But also, if you, like we were talking about the other day, if you want to be a biologist, if you want to be a marine biologist or somebody who studies habitats and environments, this is really important stuff to think about, or even just being a voter who makes decisions on stuff like this. We want to think about these things and how they're going to change the world around us, and being on top of them, knowing what's going on, is going to be one of the best tools we can have to fix them or keep them from getting worse. So in the name of that, let's get right into our Google quiz. Again, I'll read her over just in case you guys have a hard time reading it or with any of the questions. Our first question here is the Arctic region on our planet is the area surrounding what? Is it the equator? Is it the North Pole, the United States, or the Arctic Ocean? Now, in the Arctic, you can find a variety of different habitats, including, now this is another one of those questions where you can click all the right answers. These little boxes, they mean that you can pick more than one, so pick all the ones you think are right. Now, you can find a variety of different habitats, including forests, rivers, prairies, or mountains. Again, pick all of them that you think are right. The Arctic is mostly just an area, so it can include a lot of different types of habitats, not just glaciers and stuff. In the Arctic, how do plants need to grow? Do they need to grow slow and tall with deep roots like you might see in the desert? Do they grow underneath the ice? Do they grow quickly during the summer and staying low to the ground? Or do plants not grow in the Arctic? The next question is, what are some of the ways that Arctic animals have adapted to survive winters there? Again, this is another one of those questions where you can select all the correct answers. Do they have thick fur? Do they migrate to warmer areas to find food? Do they sleep during the day? Or do they have thick layers of fat called blubber? With climate change, why is it a problem for temperatures to rise and ice to melt in the Arctic? Is it actually nice for the animals in the Arctic to have more warm weather? Will Arctic plants take over if it gets too warm? Do Arctic animals not like warm days? Or is ice melting destroying Arctic habitats and making sea levels rise all over the planet? Now for our long answer part here, I kind of want to try a different kind of thought experiment. A lot of times I have you think about the kind of environment, what are your favorite things about it, what are some things we can do to protect it. Here, we know that since people have lived there for a very long time, like the Inuit and the Sami people, like we're going to talk about in our brain pop, life in the Arctic can be difficult. But since people have done it for a long time, what are some things that you would want or need if you were going to try to survive a year in the Arctic? I want you to think about some of the things that the Inuit and the Sami people do to survive, but I also want you to think about what are some of the things that you might bring or find in the environment that would help you survive or keep you happy. You might notice in the brain pop, they talk about how in the summer, since our Earth, our planet, is at a little bit of a tilt, you can see here on my planet, it's tilted a little bit. During the summer, the Arctic stays facing the sun all day for months, which means that there's no nighttime in certain points during certain times in the year, that there's no nighttime during the summer in many parts of the Arctic. Same thing goes that during the winter, when they're facing away, there is no daytime. For months and months and months, it stays very dark in parts of the Arctic. What would you do to stay happy and warm during those long winter nights? Um, think about the kind of things that you might want to do when you're staying warm and at home. Think of some of the things you might do to try to survive in those cold days. Would you be out there fishing with the Sami people and throwing out your nets, or might you be out there on a canoe paddling and trying to hunt whales or seals and stuff like that? What are the kind of things that you might want to do? What kind of things would you want to check out if you were there? Looks like I'm running out of time here, so again, let me know how your blubber gloves go, take some pictures, and keep it awesome, okay, guys?